Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 2, on page 1169 at the top. So, for the record, the pages have been posted at ayinbeis.com. So I know that it was done in the group, but you could also go to ayinbeis.com. It's been updated now. Yesterday, I was told. So we're on top of page 1169. And in this new Maimer 140, the Rebbe Rashab digging deeper into the Pasach Eliyahu. This is what we learned yesterday, stating that though we had discussed that in Atzilus itself, you have both Das Elyon and Das Tachten, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, which means the perspective from above, the Ayin that reflects the divine perspective, and the Ayin of Yesh Anivra, the perspective from below, that the divine that relates to existence. But from the language in the Pasach Eliyahu, da fikas eset tikun lanhaga behin almin mashma, that all the 10 spheres of Atzilus are all the tzedach, are all for existence, for the world. Even, and then explained it with what we learned earlier in the name of the Pardes, that also Chachma and Bina, even though on one end they're nistaris, they're concealed because they're only a revelation to himself, to the person who's using Chachma and Bina, nistaris, but nevertheless they're also the tzedach ha'elamis. Now, what role do they play that the world's benefit, that is for the need of the world? That there should be an understanding and comprehension of the divine, and the midas of Atzilus give a hergish of elikus, a derher, a get lecher derher. So we see that all the spheres are guided toward our purpose. Their purpose is to serve existence. Then he brought from the Tikkun Ezer that Bereishis, in the word Bereishis, is hinted to, allude to all the 10 spheres are in the word Bereishis. So there, and if one is missing, the lo yishtalim bria, the creation is not complete. The creation would not be completed. So all this indicates to us that the spheres, all of them, are for the purpose of the world, meaning they relate to the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. Then he added the Ashlema, you could say that Chachma and Bina is the root that relates to the world, the hidden worlds, Alma Diskasia, and Zah and Malchus is what relates to the revealed worlds. Okay. So Lefizeh, he says, Klolus ha'esespheres datzilus hem b'chinas ayin ha'shayach la'yesh ha'nivra. Okay. Then he adds more to make the case, to build this relationship with Atzilus to the creation. Not Atzilus as it's reflecting the divine purpose higher than Atzilus, which would be the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, the dveikus that we talked about. He's focusing now how Atzilus relates to existence, and he's going deeper into that relationship. Obviously, it doesn't negate what was said earlier. He's just going deeper and more detailed into Atzilus' relationship with Biyah. So now he adds another thing. Also, the kelim of Atzilus are very clearly related to the structure of existence. I'll read this quickly again. I'm reading the 4 lines, 5th line from the bottom of page 1168. We learned this yesterday, but I'm going to go over it again now. V'gam, in addition to what we just said, overall that all the spheres are guided, are directed towards for the purpose of existence, he says, V'gam hari ha-kelim d'Atzilus, hari hem b'chinas metzias davar. The kelim of Atzilus are clearly metzias davar. They are an identity, as we discussed. Shari yeshem l'esespheres b'metzias. Because esespheres are not just figurative, they're not just imaginary, they're not just abstract, they are an existing entity. And in Kelim, you have to say that they're actually defined spheres, Chachma Bina. When it comes to Oyer, the Eich shenemar b'chinas ha'eres, however you interpret Oyer, Either they're completely shapeless, or they also have spheres, but they're shapeless compared to the kelim. That's the eris. But how they be kelim? In kelim, there are no such two opinions. Kelim for sure is a matter of defined identities and entities. They're mitzias dover, they're existing entity, ruchnius, and elikus, like it continues. The imei yesem elikus mamish. These kelim are mamish elikus. They're not independent. They're divine containers. They're divine entities. Chachma bina kilei, chachma klei bina. But now, in the state of kelim, they become a defined mitzias. And then I explained the parentheses, and that's where we stopped. So let me go over the parentheses again. However, they're not agbola mamish. They're not literally a defined state like in Biyah. He has the word chaz v'shalom. It's an interesting word. Chaz v'shalom means God forbid. And I'll get to the pardes in a minute. So I explained yesterday, I began to explain what this means. That on one hand, the kelim are mitzias mugbal, mitzias dover, mitzias mugbal. And yet they're not gvul hagbola mamish. So there are different explanations given for it. The one I used yesterday and explained yesterday was, one is that they're defined by their shiur, which means they're defined, it's chesed and not gvura, but it's not gvul mamish because it's chesed that goes ein sof. So the chesed itself is in the kav of chesed, it can go forever. In biyah, it's mugbal also how much you can extend, how much a human being, for example, can only do that much chesed simply because we're defined mortal creations. In Atzilus, because it's elikus, so it's elikus wants chesed, but the chesed itself is infinite, has infinite possibilities. So the Hagbala is the fact that it's defined as chesed and not gvura, but it's not Hagbala mamish as in having a limit. There's no limit to it. So essentially its parameters are only what it's not. In other words, it's that is distinguished from other entities, but not in its unlimited capacity. Whereas in Biyah, the capacity is also limited. That's one way it's explained. Another way, I don't know if it's a different way, but they use the example of the koyach. This is Samach Vav he says about a person has the power to write. So we know, technically speaking, you when you write Aleph, Beis, Gimel, you write letters or words. So those are defined letters and words. Your hand can technically write much more, an unlimited amount. In a human being, obviously there's a limit because we don't have that strength to continue to write and write and write. So when you say that a person has the koyach hagvul, the power of limitation, of limiting what they write, is it true limit? Or it's only because you're just expressing yourself in that word? So in other words, the Eibishter has the power to write. He writes the word chesed, gvura. I don't say the word, he means he manifests in these type of dimensions. That's his power to do so. Like I mentioned from the Vedas HaKedesh, Kishem sheyesh lekecha bebilti bagvul. Just like God has the power in the infinite, he has the power to create the finite. Why is that less of a divine Ein Sof? Just because he chose to define it in Chesed and Gvura, what makes it less Ein Sof? So it's not just Ein Sof in its extension, but also the very Chesed is only because God wanted it to be Chesed, but doesn't limit God. God is not defined by Chesed. He wants now to express himself through Chesed. So it's like Bli Gvul packaged in the Gvul called Chesed. These are just two explanations. There are probably more, but the point being is that the Kalim create some finite structure, whereas the Eiris, as he just said, there are two opinions. Either the Eiris are completely shapeless, or the Eiris also have something, but they don't have shape until they actually enter the containers. So he's not trying to say that the Eiris of Atzilus don't relate to the worlds. Because remember, he said the Esser spheres in general, the Tzedach HaElemus, but the Kalim make it really very clearly defined as such, because the Kalim are true structure, but it's a divine structure, it's a spiritual structure. It's a divine structure. In Biyah, it's a spiritual structure, not fully divine. And in Asiyah, it becomes a real physical structure. Asiyah Gashmis.
Rabbi,
So the fact of what we've determined now, what we've established now, is that in the very word Gvul, there are many levels. When we say Gvul in Elam Hazeh, we mean Gvul, we mean actual time and space. Things are limited. This table is only this and this size. When you say Gvul in Ruchnius, you mean spiritual space and time. When you say Gvul in Atzilus, you mean, like I just explained, you only mean Gvul in, the Gvul is only in its, that it has an identity, but it doesn't have anything beyond that. It doesn't have any independence because it's a divine identity. So the fact that there's an identity is not a contradiction to being divine, because the divine wants this identity, the chesed of Elikus, the gvura of Elikus, the teferes of Elikus. So that's what he's saying now. So the kelim give it that type of substance. So now we have a defined entity, and that's clearly for the purpose of existence.
My question? So,
go ahead.
So the kelim of these midos, chesed, for example, is this mamash it is the existence itself of kindness, or it's the capacity that kindness should exist in that defined aspect of elokus. So in other words, is that all the chesed there can be in the world, or this is chas lahavdil? Is this like a platonic form, if you will? Like it is a very clearly defined concept. This is what kindness is. This is what chesed is. But whether or not I can create kindness in the world depends on whether or not I want to be kind. There is such a thing as kindness, but maybe I'm just I'm cruel. Maybe my yetzer hara is really bad. Do you understand the question?
Are you talking about us, or are we talking about Atzilus now?
I'm talking about Atzilus, but these are potentialities that are supposed to come into Bia, aren't they? Their existence.
Atzilus is the quintessential perfect chesed of God's. We're not talking about Bia right now. We're talking about the chesed of Atzilus. Is godly chesed.
I see. It's not human chesed.
No, we are trying to aspire to draw that into our lives. And yes, the purpose of that divine chesed is to teach us how we should feel and experience God through chesed and gvura.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay. The second half of the parentheses, he just goes back to say, L'dasa pardis mashakos b'seif yitzir midos eser she'en lensof hu b'chinas hakelim. So let me just explain. The Sefer Yetzirah says the statement, Eser Sfiras Blima, Midosan Eser. Midosa means their measure is 10. They're 10 and not 9, not 11. She'ein lehen sof, that have no limit. And that's the state of Kalim. So the Sefer Yetzirah can be explained on the level of Oyer also. But according to the Pardes, it's referring to the Kalim. So we see from that the Kalim have 10, a structure of 10, but they don't have a limit. Like I said, each one is infinite chesed, infinite gvura. I believe that's what he's adding here. Okay. Now we continue on from after the parentheses, line 2. Ukamoishin is barli'il. That, okay. It's actually that line, that word belongs before. So they're Metzius Mugbal, as was explained earlier. V'hu b'chinas yesh hanetzal. And this is called the yesh hanetzal. These kalim are called a yesh, but the yesh of emanation, not the yesh hanivra. Because they're a yesh. Compared to oyer, which is ayin, they're a yesh. They're a defined identity. Chesed, gvura, like we just said. A metzias dover, metzias mugbal. Not the gvul of biyah, but still gvul. So this is called a yesh hanetzal.
It sounds like he's going in to answer my question a little bit.
I don't know. We shall read and we'll see. V'im kain. So now, what do we derive from this? V'im kain, and if so, gam hamshocha me'edin sof ha'maitzel alatzilus hu b'chinas ayin shel hayesh. So based on this, he's going even further. That also the hamshocha, not just atzilus, but even from the emanator, Eden Sof HaMaitzel, to Atzilus, is the ayin of the yesh, which yesh, the ayin of b'chinas yesh hanetzal. So now he's introducing another definition in the ayin. Remember we spoke about ayin of the yesh hamiti. There's the ayin of the yesh hanivra. Now he's introducing the ayin of the yesh hanetzal. So based on this deeper understanding of Atzilus, that the whole of Atzilus is for the purpose of existence. And now specifically, especially the Kalim, which are so defined, the Yesh HaNetzal. So what is the ayin of the Yesh HaNetzal? Even the Ein Sof higher than Atzilus is the ayin of the Yesh HaNetzal, which is lower than the ayin of the Yesh HaMiti. So it's Taka Yesh HaNetzal. It's the Netzal, the Yesh of the Kalim of Atzilus. But now we've established that all of Atzilus is connected to the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, because Atzilus is in order for the Tzedek HaElimus of Biyah, like we spoke, it's for that purpose. And even higher than Atzilus, it is to the ayin of the Yesh HaNetzal relating to Atzilus. For Atzilus to function, to do its function to relate to worlds. So basically you'd say the ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, then the ayin of the Yesh HaNetzal, and the Netzal becomes the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. That's what he's introducing now. So now he's going to bring this back to the level of Keser. V'zeh inyan ha-Keser. Remember, Keser is Keser of Atzilus. It's l'mayla ma'atzilus. It's the maitzil. So he said, this is Keser. Shehu b'bchinas mamutza. Keser is a state of an interface. V'yesh beis madregas. Keser has two levels. What are the two levels? B'chinas tachteina sheba'atzmus. It is the tachteina Atik, is the lower level of atzmus, of the core essence of the divine that's higher than Keser. V'reish moker l'natzolim. And Arich is the head, the beginning, Reish, here with the Ayud, Reish. Hamokir, the beginning of and the source of the emanations. The Mashu Mokir l'natzolim, when you say that Keser is a source for the emanations of Atzilus, that means the ayin of the Yesh HaNetzal. That's why it's a Mokir for Netzolim. And the higher level of Keser, which is considered the lower level of Atzmus, of the core of Ilakus, how do you do it? The B'chinas Achrenu Zeu B'chinas Ha'ara Levad. It's known that this level, this lower, what does it mean lower? It doesn't mean lower in space. It means lower in quality, that it's only a reflection. Like it says in Likut Teira Shir Hashirim, in the explanation of the Maimer Shcheira Ani. V'hainu, this means shezeh gamkein rak b'chinas ayin. Since it's ha'ara, it's also only a level of ayin. It's not a level of the source. But this level of ayin is what? Avlu b'chinas ayin shel hayesh ha'amiti. Is the ayin of the yesh ha'amiti. So now we've introduced another level that has the two levels of ayin in it. Till now we were discussing how it is in Atzilus is the ayin of the Yesh HaMiti in the last mimer. Then he went that Atzilus has both elements to it. In this mimer now he's establishing that Atzilus is primarily the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. And Keser is now a level that has both ayins. The ayin of Yesh HaMiti is Tachteina Sheba Maitzil, Tachteina Sheba Ein Sof, like he said, Tachteina Sheba Atzmus, Achreina Sheba Atzmus, and the ayin of the Yesh HaNetzal is the level that's the Mokir, the Reish Mokir l'Netzolim. Okay, so yet another level here. I should write this down. I want to write this down. Okay. Any questions before I continue? Because it's introduced now another place. Now, I've said a number of times, the reason this shouldn't be seen as contradictions, because he's placing, remember, ayin is about a level of bittul. He's placing these different levels of bittul are all relative. So we've now he's placing them everywhere, because whatever level of interface we're dealing with, you need both sides. That which represents the divine, the bittul to the etzem, and that which represents the bittul, that relates to existence. So now we found it also now in Keser. And Atzilus is Yesh Ayin of Yesh Nivra. Okay. Ube'emes Yashlemer, Friedrich Rebbe Rashab continues. And in truth, you can say, the Gam B'chinas Zu, Eina B'chinas Ayin Hamiti Adayin. Is that digging even further, that even this level of Atik, Achrena Sheba Atzmos, B'chinas Achrena Sheba Atzmos, that is like the lower level of the core above it, is also not the Ayin Amiti. Yet. The Gam Chitzenius Atik Bo B'chinas Islapshus. Because the outer dimension of Atik comes in the form of Islapshus. It does manifest and get enclosed in lower levels. U'kamoshn is barely ill, as was explained earlier. The Chitzenius Atik, the outer dimension of Atik, hu b'chinas einuk proti hamislabish b'chochma. It's a specific pleasure that manifests the chochma. So Chitzenius Atik is not completely removed from the lower levels. And as such, you can't call it the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, or he calls it b'chinas Ayin Amiti. So where is the real Ayin Amiti? So he says, V'ika b'chinas Ayin Amiti. Hu b'chinas Pnimius Atik is the inner dimension of Atik. That's the real Ayin Amiti, because Pnimius Atik is removed completely from existence. So look how many levels we're getting here. Even more levels are developing now. So now in Keser, first he said Arich and Atik. Now in Atik itself, he's saying Chitzenius Atik and Pnimius Atik. That Chitzenius Atik is more, relates to lower, which means the Ayin of the Yesh HaNetzal, and Pnimius Atik is the Ayin Amiti of the Yesh Amiti. Everyone following? It's a lot of levels here. The Yesh Shleimer, in the parentheses that Rebbe Rashab has now, and we can say, the Iker B'chinas Achrena Sheba'atzmus, the primary level, that is the Achrena, the lowest part of Atzmus, meaning it's still Atzmus, but it's a reflection of Atzmus. Here, by the way, does not mean Atzmus built in Mitzias Nimtza. He's talking about Atzmus here, meaning anything higher than Keser and Pnimius Atik. Yeshlem the Iker B'chinas Achrena Sheba'atzmus Zeh B'chinas Pnimius Atik. The Hainu Gimel Reshen is the Atik. That the primary thing of Achrena is the Pnimius Atik, which is the three Reshenis. That is the three higher levels in Atik itself, which is Gimel Reshenis is usually Keser Chachma Bina of Atik. The Efsher, and maybe and perhaps the Ika B'chinas Ayin Amiti, that the primary level of Ayin Amiti is even more than that. Hu B'chinas Ein Sof Shebeteich Pnimius Atik. Is the Ein Sof, the infinite divine, that is within Pnimius Atik, the Hainu Teichrad Lo, within Reisha de Lo Yisyada, which is the highest levels in Atik. The Hainu B'chinas Ein Sof Shenimtza Umistalim Umishtakech Betlas Reishin. Oh, yeah. We learned about this earlier. Which is the Ein Sof that's found and concealed, Umishtakech Betlas Reishin, and is Shtakech. Lo Yisyada, Reisha de Lo Yisyada means the head that is unknown. So it's concealed and unknown in the three Reishin. The three Reishin of the three heads is Gimel Reshen is Keser Chachma Bina, U'kamosh Keser B'Likutei Torah Ba'abir de Shabbos Shabbosin. Like he says in Likutei Torah in the explanation of the Maimer Shabbos Shabbosin, which I believe is in Bahar. Bahar or Achrei. One of the two. I'll explain this parentheses in a moment. However, according to what's explained, what it says there in Likutei Torah, Shezeu l'mayla mebchinas kedesh hakadoshim. that according to what it says there, that this is higher than the Kodesh HaKadoshim. If you may recall, when we talked about Shabbos, we talked about the Shvi'ah, we talked about Kodesh HaKadoshim being Kodesh. HaKadoshim are 3 levels. Kodesh is the holy, and holies is 2, so it's 3. Holy of holies is 3 levels. So he says, the Kuteteri says, according to what it says there, that's higher than the holy of holies. Yesh lemer, shezel kamei b'chinas yesh hamiti. That this Ein Sof is like the Yesh Amiti, B'chinas Radla, Zeh B'chinas Ayin Amiti. And Radla would be then considered the Ayin Amiti. So yet another explanation. So let me sum up what he said now, and I'll explain a bit. So we first established in this Maimer that Atzilus is primarily for the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. Keser, the lower level of Keser, is also for the Ayin of the Yesh HaNetzal. Atik is the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, and in Atik itself, he broke it now further, Chetzenius Atik and Pnimius Atik, and even that further. In Pnimius Atik itself, you have the Radla, which is a Keli, or the place where Ein Sof resides. So Radla is the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti in Pnimius Atik itself, in the highest levels of Pnimius Atik. Now, obviously, this isn't all semantics. It's not just putting ayins everywhere. Everything here is in a different level. You would have to spell it out in Avodah. Like I said yesterday in the previous classes, if you speak on a very basic level, you begin with saying, okay, I exist, I'm the Yesh HaNivra, and I come to relate to the divine, alakus, that gives me life and sustenance, but it's on my terms. So there's a certain measure of bittul hayesh, we called it, the bittul hayesh, that we recognize that I'm not self-made. My livelihood, my parnosa, my food, my sustenance, my family, my life, and everything comes from God. And therefore I acknowledge it. Moida'ani, Birchas HaMazon, Birchas HaNenin, Birchas HaShachar, the blessings and essentially our commitment to God for giving us life, the ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, of Yesh HaNivra. We slowly, from there we climb to the point to understand that there's also the likus on things on God's terms, not on our terms. What does God want of us and what God wants, not just what we get from it or how we relate to it. So that would be a perspective where the ikir is elikus, and the secondary is the ayin, which is ha'ara. It's nullified in the presence of the higher levels. That's what we've been learning in general. But when you think about it, in every level in Ishtalshalus, you always will have these 2 elements. Is it focusing on the divine elements in the function of that particular level? Or is it focusing on, like the chief of staff, who's focusing on what the divine wants, on the terms of the divine? So wherever you go, you need these 2 levels. Also in Keser. Keser itself in general is the Ratzon and Tainug of Elikus. The Keches Premium, the immanent and internalized faculties, are Chachme through Malchus. But Keser is the transcendent. But Keser itself, we've learned at length, has 2 levels. How it relates to existence, God wants existence. So within Keser, the Ratzon of to existence, and there's reflection, this is what I want. So in Keser too, you could see these 2 levels. And the deeper you go, that doesn't take away. Every level is always going to have 2 sides. One, how it's receiving from higher than it, and the other is how it's transmitting to lower than it. And in a way, that's the difference between the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra and the ayin of the Yesh HaMiti. So now he's established that in Keser, you also can talk about the Ein Sof within Keser is the ayin of the Yesh HaMiti. Radla would be ayin of Yesh HaMiti. Then the lower level of Atik would be ayin of Yesh HaNetzal. And then you can go lower or you can go higher. Now we've already learned that the 2 levels of ayin exist even lifnei tzimtzum, and definitely after the tzimtzum. But now he's placing it more in the Shtalshalis itself, in Atzilus, Biyah, now higher than Atzilus, Keser, and so on. But he's going to work his way back up. That's where we're going from here.
Did you say that those levels existed prior to the symptom?
In Ayin Beis, he talks about these two levels also exist prior to the symptom. Yeah.
Is that a digression for me to ask you how that can be?
It's not a digression. You just simply have to go back to the recordings of the classes. I'll refer you what pages it's talked about. It's discussed at length. You have to go back to the pages. Let me tell you exactly where it is. 1 minute. From page 1147, through 1150, he spoke three different ways of explaining the two levels of Ayin.
Thank you.
So I would recommend, if those that want to go back there, you can go back, and that's where it's discussed at length. Yeah, then he went to the levels of Bittul. I'm already looking, I might as well see it through. Okay, good. Okay. Any questions? If not, I'll continue to the next paragraph. Okay. Okay. The Inyan in this is, which is going to further explain what these two levels of Ayin are. Because now we can say the Bechlolus, that in general, Beis B'chinas Ayin, the two levels of Ayin, and here's yet another level. Hu B'chinas Pnimius HaKav, V'chitzenius HaKav. That these two levels of Ayin is the inner dimension of the Kav and the outer dimension of the Kav. So let's explain, what is the Kav? Remember, Kav means a line. Kav Chut is the full expression. The way the Eitz Chaim puts it is that before all of existence, Ein Sof Mamala Kol HaMetzias, the infinite divine filled everything that would become existence. And then Tzimtzum Atzmei, the Eibishter concealed the divine consciousness, the divine light, and left a cholol u'mokem ponei, a hole and an empty space, all conceptual. And then v'himshich, and then he drew from the Ein Sof that was around the space a kav v'chut kotzer, a short line and thread that would be the light, the energy, like a brush, a paintbrush, or what's the word you use? Another word I wanted to use, I forgot what the word is. To create all of existence. So this kav, of course, to refer to so many places of Chassidus, and we learned about it at length, is essentially the Oir HaGvul, the Oiris, that draw down from the 10 hidden spheres of God envisioning and allocating the resources before the tzimtzum. Think of the artist first envisioning the 10 spheres, and then the tzimtzum allows the space for the canvas, and now starts the actual paint job, the creation, through the kav. So the kav is essentially the carrier of the divine creative energy rooted before the tzimtzum all the way in the highest levels. But it follows the tzimtzum, because only after the tzimtzum does it become a narrow kav, a narrow thread that has hierarchy, higher and lower. Now this kav has an inner and an outer dimension. Like everything has a pnimius and chitzenius. We just said it in Keser, we said it in Chochmah. You see, everywhere he's going, we have pnimius and chitzenius. So there's a pnimius HaKav and Chetzenis HaKav. And now he's saying these two levels of Ayin are also carried in the Kav, in the Pnimius HaChetzenis, which only reinforces the point that I've been making. The Eibishter implanted in the whole Seder Ishtalshel is both perspectives, Das Elyon and Das Tachten. The Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh, he wants it to be everywhere. So wherever you're at, you always are able to access both levels. One, a divine that relates to the lower existence, and the other is the level of divine that relates to its source and its dveikus and attachment and seeing how the divine looks at things. And you always need both sides. You need both completely functioning well. So now the Ayin between the Yesh Amiti, Yesh Nivra has taken on so many different locations and spaces, basically to tell us it's carried everywhere. But where does it get to Keser? It has to go through the Kav. Now we could understand where the Kav gets it from Lifnei Tzimtzum. So really, all these levels are all speaking to each other. And they're like these two perspectives. So this interface is now everywhere. Look how the Rebbe Rashab has developed. The interface is really everywhere. Wherever you turn, you can find interface. Whether you're in Biyah, whether you're in Atzilus, whether you're in Keser, whether you're now Kav, Lifnei Tzimtzum, Sovev, Mamala, Eiris, Kalim. That's the key thing to remember. Now, obviously, it takes work and time for us to distinguish and say, what's the difference between how the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh Netzal, the Yesh Nivra, is in Keser? How is it in Chochmah? How is it in Malchus? How is it in Biyah? How is it in higher than Atzilus? That would need an explanation. What is the difference? But generally, they're all reflective of the two levels. It's like climbing a ladder. When you climb a ladder, you step one foot is on the higher rung, looking up. That's the Ayin of Yesh Amiti. The other foot is still below, relating to the lower step, and you're continuously growing. So there's always going to be something you're looking up to, and there's something that where you're coming from and relating to that which is lower than you. So there's a constant journey like that. And this is also true every teacher and student. There's things that this teacher is relating to the student on his terms, but there's always something above his head that motivates him, and continuously one grows higher and higher and higher. So that's in very Balabatish terms what these two levels of Ayin are, and all these levels. Now he's saying the Inyan is that in general, these two levels of Ayin is the inner dimension of the Kav and the outer dimension of the Kav. So he's going to explain now. The Hinegili HaKav, because the revelation of the Kav, of this thread of light, Hanimshach Be'elamis, which is drawn and transmits into the worlds, into existence. That's the whole purpose of it. The Kav, after the Tzimtzum, is meant to create and draw down and manifest into existence. He says, Harihu ba b'bchinas his chalkus or b'bchinas his slapshus. The Kav is not a detached, aloof form of energy. It manifests in distinction, in levels. And in slapshus, and it enclosed, it relates, it engages with the levels it's creating. So it's not just a Kav apart from everything, which immediately tells you that the Kav is also relating to existence. Atzilus relates to existence, like we said, because it gives us the knowledge and awareness of the divine and a hergish and elikus, a feeling of the divine. But the Kav relates to existence because it's creating it. U'kamoshn is bar li'il. Like we learned earlier in the Maimer, Dibra Maskul Rosh Hamatis Ha'alef. In the Maimer Rosh Hamatis Ha'alef, which goes back to page 62, in volume 1, very early on, the Kav Sha'osem in the Kudus, the Kav which is made up of points, which we learned earlier as well, a few pages back. Remember, a line is made up of the Kudus. It's the Kuda Kav Shetach. You have a point, many points create a line. Many lines create a plane, a shetach, with width and length. A kav is only length. So it's made up of nekudis, who sebnifra to esesfiras b'madregas pratis. So what do we learn? That the kav, which is made up of points, what are these points? The points are the 10 spheres that are specified in their specific levels. So we see that the kav already carries 10 spheres in it. That tells you that it's not a makif. It's not a transcendent energy that's removed from existence. It's carrying the Nekudis. It's made of Nekudis, and that's that the 10 spheres have been defined within it. They have not yet manifest Eris and Kalim in Atzilus in a full structured sense, but the Kav carries the DNA of these 10 spheres. The Gam B'Sharshe Eris. So now he's going to Eir. Not talking about Kalim. Also in the root of the Eris. K'may Kedim at Tzimtzum. Even as they are before the Tzimtzum, Yesh Behem Eses Spheres. That's called the 10 hidden spheres. They have within them 10 spheres. The only thing is, the 10 spheres there are completely united and absorbed, completely unified with the source. We said this in the previous Maimer, that you are one and not a measurable one. Total oneness, everything is encompassed. And then, antu dafikuslon esa tikunin v'karinolon sfirin, esa sfirin. So the first level is that it's all encompassed in one vision, the vision of the artist of these 10 spheres. But there's already 10 spheres, but they're still in all one with the vision. So they're not defined structures yet, but the concept exists.
Rabbi, are you saying that the Kav is a conduit for both the Kalim and the Oris?
No, I didn't say it's not discussion here. This is a long discussion in the beginning of Ayin Beis. The Kav is Oir, but the Oir also carries the power to create Kalim, which comes from the Reshimu, which is the trace of the Koyach HaGvul, that is the Koyach of the power of Gvul. So Eris and Kalim are two tracks, but just like a body and a soul are two tracks, the soul does not create the body, but it's the soul's development that the body emerges as the soul develops. So it comes through the soul. The energy carries the power to create containers, even though the energy, the light, is not a container itself.
Thank you.
Okay. V'ayidei tzimtzum, tzimtzum, and through the tzimtzum, nifrutu kol spheres b'fnei atzmei. Through the tzimtzum, the spheres move from a state of complete absorption, complete oneness in the vision, and they become specific spheres. And that's the kav that's made up of points of these spheres. We learned this at length in Tzadik Daled a while back when we were learning. He said, if you remember, Nukuda Kav Shetach, he spoke about the Nukuda, how the Eris are before the Tzimtzum, and then how they become, after the Tzimtzum, they become specific entities, but they're not yet fully structured until they come into the Kalim. So what do you see from this? That the Kav has within it already the DNA of existence, the 10 spheres. And then as it continues the journey, he says, the Gambam Shachas HaKav. Now, though it's already has within it, but it's still not in a defined, fully defined state. Also in the transmission of the Kav, Hinadayim B'chinas Esesfiras Blima. They're still Blima, without substance. So there's Esesfiras now, there's defined distinct entities, but they're not yet, they don't yet have structure and substance. That's why they're only Nekudis. They're just points in the Kav. A point is not a full structure, it's just a point. Spark. And then later they become Eris, they become manifest in the containers. Through that, the Eir is concealed, and thus you create a full structure is created from it. Okay, so you see here the three stages essentially, but the Kav has already something that relates to existence, but it's not fully developed yet until it comes into Kalim, Ukamotion is barley ill, as was explained earlier. The Inyan v'Hakadosh Baruch Hu asa kamid tzimtzumim derech kama elemus. Oh wow. He's going back now, hundreds of pages, to the Moshe, if you remember the Teres HaMagid and Aseh L'Chashtei Chatzetzes, I'll tell you what page. Here, on page 832, Taf Lamed Beis, chapter 405. There's still chapters then. So he continues explaining that the Magid speaks about Asher L'Chashtei Chatzetzes, that God said, make two chatzetzes, which is chetzitzuris, two halves who join together, godliness and human being. And to do so, God first created a tzimtzum, kama tzimtzumim, through kama elemus, in order to create a situation where the existence, the human being, can then connect the two. Because if he didn't create tzimtzumim, there've never been two entities. That's what he explains back there. Yeah. Just 1 second. Yeah. So he's referring back to there. That what did we learn there? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu also kamet tzimtzum derech kama elmas sha'oir ba b'bchinas tzimtzum. That the air comes in a state of concealment, m'madrega lemadrega, a diminishment from level to level, u'b'bchinas islapshus v'helam, in a way that it manifests within, enclosed within, and gets concealed. Shegam hislapshus b'bchinas keser hu b'chinas helam. Even the slapshus in Keser, which is the higher level, higher than Atzilus, is in a state of concealment. Because the energy has been concealed in order to allow the possibility that it should be received by the world. In other words, we need to have these shades, because the light on its own is too intense. So clearly what's happening here is that Tzimtzum, which means existence, in order to have existence, is affecting all the worlds, affecting the whole process, including, of course, the Kav. V'yesh kama mesachim upasayis. There are many curtains, and pasayis, what we translate pasayis. Many curtains, many sheaths, many filters, many layers. A parsa is partitions. Many curtains and partitions. Mereish kol dargin at seif kol dargin. From the highest levels to the lowest levels. V'hainu. And all this means l'fi sha'akav in yonish shayiyah idezei savas elemus. Why do you need all these diminishments? Because the whole purpose of the kav is that it should be able to create, that through it should be creation of the world. That's why it has to be subject to these concealments and these partitions and these curtains. So in order to create existence, and there should be a revelation of light in the elements, commensurate to the way they are existing, to their structure, and the way they were created. And this was the reason in the first place there was a tzimtzum in the infinite divine light, that there should be a revelation in such a manner that in a way that it should be manifest and grasped and held onto within the concealment of the tzimtzum. As was explained earlier. Remember that the whole purpose of the Gili should come into Tzimtzum, so we should be able to receive it, and that is that it should be that that within the Tzimtzum, which allows for existence, we should be able to contain this light, to the point, if you recall, to transform the Tzimtzum. That was the goal. V'kol zeh, all this is lefi sheklolos gili hakav hu rak ha'ara de ha'ara levad. All this is because the general revelation of the kav is only a reflection of a reflection. If you remember, that's the ayin of yesh hanivra. U'kamay shekosav be'ircha nira er. In your light, you will see light. The be'ercha, the er ein sof, shalifnei tzimtzum, shagam zehu rak ha'ara levad. And the ercha, the light before the tzimtzum, which is also only a reflection, is bar b'samach, as shall be explained soon, nearby. Nira er, in this er nira er will appear a light, be gili hakav la'acharat tzimtzum. In the revelation of the kav that follows the tzimtzum. I'm going to stop here, because now begins a parenthesis which goes till where? To the next page. So what do we establish here? That the kav, despite its lofty level, that is drawing down the energy from Eir Ein Sof, and then the day has a relationship with existence and is subject to the tzimtzumim in order to reveal the divine within existence. And that's why it's a reflection of reflection. So even the kav, we see a dimension that relates to the ayin of the yesh hanetzal, ayin of yesh hanivra. That's where he's leading to. But then he's going to go to the pnimius hakav, which is the other side of things. So we'll stop here.